Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
Support comes from the University of Alaska College Savings Plan, helping you and your child save for college every step of the way, from diapers to diploma. More information at uacollegesavings.com.
The National Weather Service.
Good Monday, everyone, and welcome to February. As always, we encourage you to stay up to date with your local weather information at weather.gov/Alaska. You'll also find information on the phone at 800-472-0391. Find us on Facebook, on Twitter, and on YouTube in the afternoon. Around 4 o'clock or so, if you go to NWS Anchorage, you'll be able to see a sneak peek of the surface charts we'll use here, as well as a quick description over about 2.5 minutes on YouTube. To get your daily afternoon map briefing there. So a sneak peek of Alaska weather before we get to this. And of course, any of that's available 24 hours a day. And of course, we encourage you to stay up to date that way using Marine VHF or your NOAA weather radio. Here's a look at what you can expect around Alaska for the next 12 to 24 hours. Here's a satellite picture, and this long stream of moisture snaking its way from corner to corner across Alaska is about all we're going to see. The pattern remains the same. We've got a ridge of high pressure that's sending warmth all the way up into the Arctic and then controlling the weather in kind of very cold fashion for the rest of the continent. For the Gulf of Alaska, it means things are not going to change very much from where they have been. We have storms coming in from the North Pacific, trying to get themselves established across the Gulf of Alaska. We have some weather making its way up through southeast. A little bit of a break right there, and even a little bit of snow around Juneau earlier today after a very non-snowy January, one for the books. Out across the west, you can see clouds working in from the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta over Norton Sound and over the Bering Strait. And a lot of very dry and cold air that's tricking the satellite into looking like there is cloud cover moving around. You can see some clouds descending right along the Alcan border, at times grazing places like Northway and Tok with maybe a little bit of light snow or just ice fog. Out across the central and western chain, a little bit of cloud buildup there. That's all in advance of some colder air working through. It's being drawn northward by a larger circulation out across the Kamchatka Peninsula and making way for a new system across the central and western Gulf. Here's a look at the weather pattern right now at 1,002 millibars. Don't have a whole lot of strength or oomph in the Gulf right now. A included front sitting across the central and eastern Gulf with a general south and easterly flow moving up the outer coast of southeast. Some pockets of rainfall there. We did have a few pockets of snow around Juneau, the capital city, earlier today. Around the Brooks Range, a weak wave of low pressure is working northward. This overall flow is bringing in that warmth across the Chukchi Sea. Several other waves of low pressure are rotating around a system out across the western Bering. And you can see how that's churning up the clouds across the southern Bering. Not a whole lot of precipitation to report in any one spot today. Most of that was fairly isolated and generally light as best we know. And again, some areas across the northern Bering and the Chukchi Seacoast have slightly stronger winds as a result. Now, there have been a few snow showers there. A generally clear sky late this afternoon around Barrow. Fog just offshore, and some of the winds a little bit stronger there as well. For snow showers across the YK Delta, we see a circulation just south of the Kenai Peninsula. Rain and snow showers possible tonight around Shelikof Strait into the Kenai Peninsula region, and snow showers may be possible across some of the higher terrain. Look for some light rain across the eastern Gulf with the frontal boundary sitting just offshore, not moving much from its current position right now. Most of the interior is going to be pretty clear and dry, so a pretty cold night, in fact, for most locations, maybe colder than last night for some. For the central and northern Gulf, look for a frontal boundary slowly creeping northward. This next system will be a little bit stronger than what we currently have in place. And out across the west, a few areas of light snow showers there, some of those trying to organize through the central and western Aleutians and generally west of the Pribilofs and the St. Matthew Island waters. By Tuesday, the front across the southern Gulf is lifting northward. Now, as we get into Wednesday, you'll see this gradually expand across all of the Gulf, and that is something that a lot of these occlusions do there. They usually just kind of spin up so much and they lose a lot of their characteristics. So that process is already beginning on Tuesday. Waves of low pressure traveling from east-southeast to west-northwest and working across the continent, and every little bit they go further and further west, the more they dry out. But we will see a chance for a few snow showers there across the west and across south central, especially the Gulf Coast regions there stand the better chance of seeing rain and or snow. Out across the central and western chain, snow showers still possible along that weak circulation west of the Pribilofs, and areas of snow and blowing snow still possible across the Arctic coast, including places like Barrow and Kaktovik. By Wednesday, the front is still lifting northward here, not making a whole lot of progress very quickly, but do notice that the pressure gradient's tightening up there. At 959 millibars, it's going to be a little bit stronger than what we currently have in place across the northern and eastern Gulf. As a result, we're going to see more of that southerly wind crank up across southeastern Alaska, probably a stronger barrier flow here across the coastal region, so watch out for turbulence, especially between Cordova and Yakutat. And we're going to see the winds pick up and down the Cook Inlet through Shelikof Strait, and that's going to be more of a northerly flow cutting down and keeping the cold moving through, but probably keeping precipitation for the Cook Inlet region at a minimum, while coastal areas like Homer and Kenai, Homer and Seward all the way up through Prince William Sound, stand a much better chance of seeing rain or snow showers there. We're also going to see some stronger winds moving through the central and eastern chain. Now, more like a breeze if you live in Dutch Harbor, but if you're out in Prince William Sound, that's probably a stronger wind for you. In the west coast, also a little bit more of an offshore flow with snow showers expected in the region on Wednesday. Here's a look at the temps we saw today. A little bit cooler there around Juneau, 30s and 40s today. Sitka made it up to 40 degrees. Ketchikan and Annette in the upper 30s. Hyder was 36, about the same for Haines and Skagway. Yakutat had 34 degrees, 35 around Cordova, 41 for Middleton Island, 20s elsewhere, including Valdez, 41 for Homer and Seward, 26 in Kenai, low 20s for Anchorage today. A little more sunshine for everyone, and as you head up into the valley, you can see the difference that's making in places like Squentna, only 9, 22 in Talkeetna, 4 in Fairbanks, 1 in Eagle, 0 in Northway, and 7 around Fort Greely this afternoon, 17 in Healy. It was 1 in Eagle, 1 in Fort Yukon, 15 below today in Arctic Village. For the Arctic coast, we saw temps from 0 to as cold as 6 below as you get down toward Akasuk. Some of the warmer weather along the coast for a change. 24 degrees around Kivalina and Kotzebue, 24 as well. 21 for Shishmaref. Temps around Nome made it up to 27, a little bit milder in Unalakleet this afternoon, 12 in McGrath, 16 in Galena. For the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta, we saw temps at or just above freezing, and you saw a little bit more of that warmth in Bethel today, as well as King Salmon and Dillingham. St. Lawrence Island, our friends out in Savunga at 30 degrees, 35 for St. Paul and St. George. The Alaska Peninsula in the mid to upper 30s, including places like Pilot Point and Port Heiden. 39 in Kodiak. AKwx was 38. And upper 20s to low 30s for the western and central Aleutians. Overnight low temperatures should be expected to hold in the upper 20s and lower 30s in the Panhandle tonight. Cordova looking at 18. It looks like some places around Glen Allen and Gulkana could drop well below 0, so prepare for a pretty chilly night there. 12 below around Fairbanks, with those clear skies really doing a number on any heat that you might have seen today. 4 below in Barrow around the Seward Peninsula, low teens to maybe single digits there. The Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta in the upper teens and low 20s. Bristol Bay looking at 26, 30 around Kodiak Island, upper 20s and lower 30s for the Alaska Peninsula, 29 in St. Paul, and back to 36 in the afternoon tomorrow. Mid to upper 30s for most of southeast. Some of the southern regions there in the Panhandle, probably lower 40s tomorrow, close to 40 around Sitka. Prince William Sound, upper 20s to mid 30s, with the Kenai Peninsula, the Cook Inlet region in the 20s, but many of the outer coastal areas in the 30s. 37 in Kodiak, back to 13 in Fairbanks, with 1 below in Fort Yukon for a high tomorrow, about the same in Barrow. 2 above in Kaktovik, teens for Kotzebue Sound, mid to lower 20s there for Norton Sound, 28 in Nome there, looking at 25 in Nunivak Island, and mid to upper 30s for Bristol Bay, closer to 40 for the Alaska Peninsula, especially places like Sand Point and False Pass. Dutch Harbor and Unalaska about 38, 36 in St. Paul, and 28 in Shemya for your Tuesday. On to flying weather. IFR conditions are expected from Kaktovik and along the coast all the way through Point Barrow and around the Horn toward Point Hope and Point Lay. As you get toward the Bering Strait, St. Lawrence Island down toward Nunivak Island should see a ribbon of IFR conditions, but as soon as you get into Norton Sound and inland areas of the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta, conditions should rapidly improve there, with VFR expected all the way through most of the Alaska passes. A few of the southern regions like Lake Clark and Merrill Pass should be a little bit more on the IFR side, especially in the eastern side, and especially Prince William Sound on the western side from Whittier all the way down towards Seward. Expect IFR conditions there, as well as Haines and the Skagway region, and some areas just south of Sandpoint. Let's check those passes though, just to be sure. Hannock, Tuvik, and Adigan Pass, as you saw it there and as you see it here, VFR conditions are expected. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass leaning over toward IFR conditions as we go through the day, probably starting at MVFR. Rainy Pass, we expect to see visual flight rule. Points eastward, probably improving toward VFR after a start around MVFR throughout your Tuesday. Isabel Pass, probably starting out around MVFR, but improvements should be noted there throughout the day. Mentasta Pass starts out a little bit on the low side at IFR, and then conditions improve as we go through Tuesday afternoon to VFR. Tenita Pass also expected to be visual through most of your Tuesday. Portage Pass, not so much. We expect to see the western side of Prince William Sound down around IFR through most of the day, and Chilcoot and White Pass at this point we're expecting to see MVFR at least and probably IFR at worst, so you get the worst forecast here at IFR. The freezing levels, we see the surface freezing line is dropping southward once again across the Alaska Peninsula and over the Cook Inlet region and Shelikof Strait, really not moving too much around the southeast right now. The elevated warmth is trying to snake its way up ahead of that frontal boundary that's just kind of lingering right about here and not really going anywhere. So tomorrow we'll still have a ribbon of slightly warmer air on the eastern side of the Gulf. Otherwise, no changes noted. The surface freezing line, though, is north up toward around St. Matthew Island and around Cape Newenham, and then west toward Kiska at this point. So warmer air is kind of hovering out there. Icing potential above 5,000 feet. We've got some pockets of moisture capable of producing isolated moderate across some parts of the Copper River Basin, the southern Kenai Peninsula into Shelikof Strait, and parts of southeast. Elsewhere, some pockets of hit and miss isolated moderate across the eastern chain and west of the Pribilofs above 2,000 to 5,000 feet. The jet stream, that super highway of weather, is sitting in the same old spot. Out across the North Pacific, you can see it racing across out of the eastern parts of Asia and Siberia to 150 to 170 knots. And then it bends hard to the left and goes north right up the western coast of Alaska. What is this doing? Well, it's sending warmth across the ice. It's sending warm water across coastal Bering Sea locations. And then all that cold air has to go somewhere. Where is it going? Dropping down into the continent. This is not an unusual pattern for wintertime in North America, but its amplitude is pretty strong. You can also see the winds racing down the eastern coast of the Gulf at 50 to as strong as 105 knots by the time it gets into the western sections of the United States. So again, this is controlling our weather, and it is unchanging at this point. At 9,000 feet, we see our east and southeasterly flow working its way over Alaska, bringing moisture into the Gulf Coast regions and then losing it as it moves across the Alaska Range. Wind speeds in the interior are about 10 to as high as 20 knots. Coastal areas, especially west of Nunivak Island and over the open water, go from about 25 knots to 40 knots. You can see some of the stronger winds here across the north and eastern Gulf, 50 knots in fact over the Dixon entrance region, and a light east and southeasterly wind moving over the Arctic coast. More of a northeasterly flow coming in at 3,000 feet for areas between Point Barrow and Prudhoe Bay and Dead Horse. Easterlies working across the interior from 20 to 25 knots. For southeast, you can see winds coming in from the east and southeast around 10 to 30 knots, and much stronger flow coming over Kodiak Island at 3,000 feet, around 60 knots or so. Opposing that, more of a north and westerly wind coming across the western Bering, 15 to as high as 25 knots there. What about turbulence? Well, we see some pockets tomorrow with that faster flow. Don't be surprised to run into some occasional moderate for southeast and just outside of places like Cordova and Valdez and Middleton Island and Seward, below 4,000 feet. For the southern tip of Kodiak Island, AKwx, all the way out toward the Alaska Peninsula and Dutch Harbor in Alaska below 4,000, there's a possibility for some occasional moderate. Probably some light chop around the eastern and central Beaufort Sea coast, generally east of Point Barrow, and then north and west of St. Lawrence Island below 3,000 feet, some faster winds hitting the capes there. That's a look at your aviation forecast. We'll be back with a look at the sea ice edge as well as your marine weather and a recap of the surface charts here in just a few minutes. Stay tuned.
Good evening. I'm Harry Keeling, and on behalf of Alaska Public Media and the Alaskan Aviation Safety Foundation, welcome to Hangar Flying. Last time our guest was Stephen Ratcliffe, who's the new Alaska director of the Cessna 180-185 Club. Stephen talked a little bit about the organization, and I in fact have had a membership many years with him, and It's only $25 a year, but I can tell you they sure do a lot of good stuff. They've got a good website, a good newsletter. They do fly-ins, and if you're a 180 or 185 fan, it's something you should look into. And the website is skywagons.org?
That is correct.
Yeah. Stephen, welcome back.
Thanks. Appreciate you having me back on the show.
So you talked a lot about the organization, a great organization, and certainly pushing the tail dragger piece, which of course I'm a big fan. One of the things you mentioned to me that I thought might be interesting to our guests or to our viewers is the study that I think the organization did on 180, 185 accidents, primarily fatalities. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, in fact, our last newsletter had a really good special report by a club member by the name of Andrew Toohey. He put together a lot of good technical information on accidents and incidents in the 180 and 185s, and I think one of the key takeaways from that was since the year 2000 there's been 76 fatalities in combined between the 180s and 185s. The average age of that was around 49 years old, with a total time around 4,600 hours of total time. Of all of the accidents or fatalities, the main driver of the fatality was flying from VFR conditions into IFR conditions.
So I think it probably no surprises there. Well, there are some surprises. One of them is the average experience level. I think that, you know, people tend to think that most accidents occur with inexperienced pilots, and that's not always or not even often the case. What did you say, 4,600 hours?
Yeah, I believe 4,600 hours was the average, and the age factor was up there also at 47 years of age.
The other thing that we've learned over and over again is if you're VMC and you fly into IMC, you're asking for trouble.
Yeah, that's correct. And you know, one of the things just from, you know, I guess my personal background and whatnot is I think, you know, maybe some of the lower time pilots are a little bit more cautious. That may or may not be maybe true, but I think sometimes as we become, you know, older in age and older in hours, we sometimes become more complacent, or we tend to push the envelope. So I think one of the takeaways for me is just to reevaluate that as I plan my routes. And as we know, the weather here in Alaska is not always the friendliest or best, but just try to keep that in mind as we plan our flights and plan our trips.
Well, you make some good points, and I think some of the lessons that we've learned with 180, 185, there are mishaps on landing. It's a challenging airplane to fly, a challenging airplane to land, and even taxi if you're not paying attention. But very seldom are those accidents fatal. But when you fly into IMC and you're not instrument rated, or even if you are, but you do it inadvertently, you're asking for trouble, and often it ends, unfortunately, in fatalities. Let's talk about something more enjoyable. What kind of, you have hydraulic skis, right?
Yes, I do. Yeah, I've got a set of Airglass 4000 hydraulic wheel skis that I run in the winter. A lot of fun.
Yeah. How long have you had those?
I've had them for a few years now, since I think 2012 is when we got them.
Nice.
It's been fun.
You run your airplane, you got a 180K up here?
That's correct. Yeah, I've got a 79 180K that I have here. So
somewhat of a sports car, isn't it?
Yeah, we converted it over from the 0470 to a fuel-injected IO 550. So it's been quite a joy. Wow.
And what kind of tires you run on it?
And on the tires in the summer months, we run 29-inch. I run the Snider wheel adapters, 10-inch by 29-inch.
Oh,
so
okay.
A lot of fun. It's a good combination and makes the off-field landings, pretty enjoyable.
Well, I really want to thank you for stepping up. You've got the enthusiasm to run this club, and I think can make a lot of contributions to safety. And of course, aviation safety is our business with the Safety Foundation. Do you have any thoughts on what maybe you as a club or as a Alaska director might do to enhance aviation safety here in Alaska?
Yeah, I think that as a club member and just a fellow pilot as well, I think there's always room for improvement on that. I think identifying key points that we can highlight, potentially put things on the website, you know, talk about it at the trade shows, things like that, are all things that we'd like to do. You know, put a focus on keeping in mind what some of the fatalities are and some of the incidents and accidents are, and try to increase awareness for that. So that's
Great.
a good point.
Great. Stephen, thanks for being on the program tonight.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate the time.
Good luck in your directorship.
Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you enjoyed Stephen tonight and last time, and I encourage you to join the 180, 185 Club. It's very worthwhile. And of course, if you're not a member of the Safety Foundation, I encourage you to join there. And if you are, make sure you're up to date on your 2016 dues. Until next time, fly safe.
Thank you, Harry. We'll see you again on Friday. Here's a look at the sea ice edge today as analyzed by our sea ice experts right here in Anchorage. And you'll notice there's a few pockets or polynyas out here across the northern parts of the Yukon coastline. All this because we've got that stronger offshore flow that's working the ice away from the coast, but is also helping to increase the ice cover north of St. Matthew. Here's St. Paul and St. George for your reference there, Cape Newingham. Still got a little bit of ice hovering in Norton Sound, but we also have that warm air that's lifting northward, so we're not really seeing tremendous growth around the Bristol Bay region, but we are kind of slowly working that ice south and west, about 15 to 30 nautical miles a day, I believe is what they said. Now, across the northern part of Cook Inlet, not really a whole lot of change here. We'll be watching for more kind of lower concentration areas north of Macoriac and along the northern coast, but that's about it for right now. For the latest on sea ice, anytime you want, weather.gov/anchorage/ice.php. And when you go there, not only can you get the outlook or the discussion for that day, you can get a map that will be similar to this. It will have a lot of chunks, kind of look like a patchwork quilt a little bit. You can see how concentrated the ice is here, or maybe you want to go over here. You can check that out. Click on that spot and it'll tell you all about the ice in that region, and you'll be able to see the longer range outlook as well. So a whole lot there, as well as very specific imagery from high resolution satellite passes. If there's something cool they can show you, it'll be on that page, weather.gov/anchorage/ice.php, the Alaska Sea Ice Desk team taking care of our friends along the coast and our fishermen and women. Here's a look at the sea ice southeast. No sea ice in southeast, I didn't say that. Here's a look at southeasterly winds in southeast. 20 to 30 knots on the inside, northerlies across the northern Lynn Canal around 10 knots, 2-foot seas there. Things somewhat quiet around the outer coast, 20 to 30 knots with winds from the east and southeast, more of an offshore flow as you get up toward Icy Cape. 30-foot seas there around Yakutat, about the same as you get down toward Dixon Entrance on Tuesday. By Wednesday, winds are coming up a little bit more to about 35 knots in the outer coast, 35 knots on the inside of Clarence Channel, and then Clarence Strait, and then northerlies for the Lynn Canal, 20 knots with a 4-foot sea. Generally speaking, just a little bit of a change with speeds coming up and the seas coming up on the inside as well, as high as 7 feet there down south. Now for south central, look for northeasterlies cutting through Cook Inlet, south of Callaghan Island, picking up even more, becoming easterly west of the Barren Islands. As you get into Shelikof Strait, 30 knots there with the northeasterly flow, 12-foot seas there, about 10 to 12-foot seas in the north and western parts of the Gulf. Northeasterlies inside of Prince William Sound. By Wednesday, everything's starting to pick up a little bit more as that low pressure system down south is getting a little bit further north. The speeds are compensating and trying to fill that in. So we have winds coming up to 40 to 45 in the north and western Gulf and 30 to 40 around Cook Inlet into Shelikof Strait. 25 knots inside of Prince William Sound with a 6-foot sea. Tuesday, northeasterlies are also coming up inside of Bristol Bay and across the southern coast of the Alaska Peninsula, 25 to 30 there, 40 to 45 though already across Castle Cape to Chignik and all the way down toward Falls Pass, 8 to as high as 20-foot seas coming up there for Wednesday. 30 to 35 in all areas, 8 to 12-foot seas on the Bering Sea coast, and you're looking at 17 to 18-foot seas along the Pacific coast with that east and northeasterly flow for midweek. Across the Aleutians, well, it was just a nice day. Look for northwesterlies around Kiska to add to, 15 knots with a 6-foot sea. Light and generally variable winds across the central chain, becoming more northwesterly as you get out toward Nikolsky, and northeasterly still in control of Unalaska to Nikolsky, 20 to 30 knots on either side with higher seas on the Pacific side. As we get into Wednesday, you can see things kind of reorganizing here to a north and northwesterly flow, 20 to 25, maybe even 30 knot winds there between Nikolsky and Atka. Look for seas around 7 to as high as 10 feet on the Bering Sea coast. 10 to 15 feet on the Pacific side, and from Kiska to Attu about 7 to 9 foot seas there on a 20 to 25 knot wind. For the west coast, look for easterlies coming off of Amonuk and over St. Lawrence Island at 15 knots, a little bit faster around Kuskokwim Bay, 25 knots there with a 6-foot sea, and easterlies over the Pribilofs with a 6-foot sea, 8-foot seas up around St. Matthew at 25 knots. Again, without that north and northeasterly wind, we're not really rapidly increasing that ice further and further south for the moment. For Wednesday there, look at that. Northeasterlies are back. 25 knots there across St. Lawrence Island, Nunivak Island, and St. Matthew. This will help move that ice a little bit further along to the south and west. 35 knots around Kuskokwim Bay with a 9-foot sea, and 25 knots for St. Paul and St. George with a 9-foot sea there. For the north coast, look for easterlies across most areas around the Beaufort and into the Chukchi Sea. A little bit more of a northeasterly flow around Cape Lisburne and Point Hope, and 15 knots coming out of Kotzebue Sound. Look for very little change there on Wednesday. Speeds come up just a little bit more. 25 knots for the Beaufort Seacoast out of the east. No direction change around Cape Lisburne to Point Hope, still running 15 knots there, and 25 knots around Point Barrow for the midweek. Recapping tonight's weather, low pressure is kind of stuck across the north and eastern Gulf. We're going to keep a kind of a wetter flow very close to the outer coast. There may be some places that don't get a whole lot of rainfall, but you'll probably see the clouds. There's still some pockets of snow showers possible across the inside of southeast. And for Prince William Sound, don't be surprised to see a few areas of light rain or some pockets of light snow falling across the YK Delta and into Norton Sound. This is a pretty narrow band of moisture, and you'll see that on the satellite picture if you check that out again. It's just kind of snaking its way from southeast to northwest across Alaska, but many parts of the interior are going to be clear, and because of that, it is going to be cold once again. A great stargazing and aurora gazing night if you can. Snow showers across some parts of the Alaska Range tomorrow, a few areas of light rain for southeast. Watch the system across the central and western Gulf. This is gradually lifting northward. The front's kind of expanding across the Gulf, and the pressure gradient and the wind is going to tighten up across the Gulf Coast as we head into Wednesday and across some of the west coast as well. Pockets of snow showers and rain and snow showers for the Alaska Peninsula as we head into Tuesday. And you can see that's expanding as we head into Wednesday. Probably looking at some areas of coastal wind coming up as we head into the midweek. Prince William Sound and certainly down through Cook Inlet and Shelikof Strait, as well as some stronger winds on either side of the Alaska Peninsula, maybe as far west as the eastern Aleutians. That's a look at your Alaska weather. Thanks for watching. We'll see you right here again tomorrow. Have a good night.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX Brief for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
Support comes from the University of Alaska College Savings Plan, helping you and your child save for college every step of the way, from diapers to diploma. More information at uacollegesavings.com.